Well, first of all, we relinquished the territory in 2005, but we more or less sat idly when Hamas, who is our own protege, that is the government, your former employer's protege, was ruling Gaza as from 2007, and we were pumping Qatari money into it all along. This is not the kind of coexistence or two-state solution.
Shalom and welcome to State of a Nation. I'm Eylon Levy. What's left of the Israeli left, and what direction will it take now in a post-October 7th world? The Israeli left, to put it lightly, is in crisis. In the last elections, Meretz failed to make the Knesset at all, and Labour, the country's founding party, crashed to only 4 seats. The Zionist left is squeezed on both sides. After October 7th, many Israelis are now more skeptical than ever of the vision of peace with the Palestinians through 2 states and territorial concessions. And at the same time, the global woke movement is hell-bent on demonizing Israel, casting support of the Palestinian cause as a core value of the modern left, attacking anyone who speaks up for Israel, no matter how peaceful, how gentle, and how humane. One of those left-wing figures under attack for speaking up for Israel is Fania Oz-Salzberger, a renowned historian and writer. Daughter of the stalwart of the early left, writer Amos Oz, Fania believes that the Zionist left still holds the keys to peace with our Palestinian neighbors. And as hateful trolls organize pile-ons against her on Twitter, she leans on her kibbutznik toughness to brush off the abuse and speak up for her values. Can a 2-state solution bring peace? Is it a solution? What would she tell Jewish students protesting for Hamas on campus? And what does she really think of Owen Jones? Welcome to State of a Nation.
Breaking news out of Israel this morning.
Shocking hostage taking.
Hundreds of Israelis are dead.
I want to bring in Israeli government spokesman.
Eylon. What happens when the 4-day pause?
How do you resolve this?
Where does this go?
Fania Oz-Salzberger, welcome to State of a Nation.
Lovely to be here, Eylon. Thanks for having me.
I want to start with an optimistic question, because I think there'll be enough pessimism to go around later. What's keeping you optimistic and hopeful nowadays?
Oh, my kibbutz education.
How so?
I was raised to be a tough cookie, to work very hard, to hope very hard, and to face adversity, which was our kind of collective legacy. So here I am facing a lot of adversity, also among and within my own people. And we are going strong, Eylon. Hope is a muscle, it is an engine. You have to treat it well and it will treat you back.
When you say we're going strong, do you mean Israeli society as a whole, the Israeli left, which is what I want to talk to you about today?
No, I'm afraid that the Israeli society as a whole is going through the worst time in its history. Divisiveness, we might get to the root of divisiveness, has become an illness, and we are ill at the same time as being injured. That's 2 different things, and the combination is very unfortunate. I think that those of us who have chosen the side of hope and are insisting of pushing forward towards the day after, towards the end of the war and the return of the hostages and the ultimate defeat of Hamas,
Amen,
are going strong because we have no other choice.
And that's what I want to talk to you about today. That source of hope, how you see the day after, specifically from the perspective of the Israeli left. Because the Israeli left isn't doing very well nowadays. The Meretz party failed to get into the Knesset in the last elections. The entire parliamentary Labour Party could fit into a taxi with room for the driver. And it looks like if the second intifada wounded the Israeli left, and the disengagement from the Gaza Strip in 2005 and the way that that blew up in everyone's faces seems to have buried the Israeli left, then the October 7th attacks really put the final nails in the coffin. Hamas not only killed the dream of peace for many people who are now much more skeptical about that, but it literally killed many of the dreamers of peace, the members of the kibbutzim who were active in the peace movements. We remember Vivian Silva, a peace activist who was burned to an ash in her home. Naama Levy abducted into the Gaza Strip. She's still there. We saw the video of her telling Hamas, but I have friends in Palestine. Let me call my friends in Gaza. So I'm wondering, at this point in history, with that dream of peace having been so horribly shattered, what does it mean to be on the Zionist left, to be a left-wing Zionist nowadays?
Thanks for the question, because this may allow us to unpack the whole issue of the Israeli left, or the left in general. There is a large part of the global left and some part of the Israeli left who have been flying on automatic pilots for a while. I've never been there. I've always belonged. I was raised in a home in which being left meant being social, democratic, liberal, perhaps liberal first, humanist, not only about Jews of all shapes and colors, but also about non-Jews, being able to cross over to a universalist viewpoint, which has a Jewish and a biblical source, and a very powerful one. So our prophets, most of them were lefties too in this respect, but to be very pragmatic and realistic in questions of Israel's security. Where I grew up, Eylon, nobody was enamored with the leadership of the Palestinians. Very often we were not enamored with our own leadership either, which is the case now, to say the least. But the idea was to try to build up from grassroots a generation able to fathom, to consider the horizon, and our horizon has been the two-state solution. This is the kind of pragmatic Zionist left to which I belong, and this part of the Zionist left has not been beaten on the 7th of October, has been reinforced on the 7th of October because, looking at it now, the romanticist notion of one state, Israelis, Palestinians, peace and love forever, which some of the extreme left has nurtured. I mean, the extreme left, which is still humanist and believes in Israelis and Palestinians living together, not in ousting all the Israelis from this land. But this kind of love and peace romanticism was not part of my own legacy. I strongly believe that Israelis and Palestinians should live in mutual respect and peace, side by side. Maybe love and peace will build up, but first a territorial agreement. If anything, Eylon, I think that the 7th of October has reinforced the two-state solution and killed off that beautiful but impractical one-state solution.
And I want to understand that, because the lesson that I think many Israelis have drawn, and many have definitely shifted to the right in the course of this war, is we withdrew from the Gaza Strip in 2005. It exploded in our faces. We not only got rockets on Ashkelon, we got rockets past Tel Aviv. We got the death squads and gang rapists of October 7th. That shows that it is too dangerous for Israel to relinquish territory. It always gets filled by terrorist organizations. But you think that the barbarism of Hamas on October 7th actually underscores the importance of separating from the Palestinians in the West Bank as well? That's what left-wing Zionism is now?
Well, first of all, we relinquished the territory in 2005, but we more or less sat idly when Hamas, who is our own protege, that is the government, your former employer's protege, was ruling Gaza as from 2007, and we were pumping Qatari money into it all along. This is not the kind of coexistence or two-state solution that we are aiming for.
No, but I'm sorry, calling Hamas the government's protege, it's true the government pumped Qatari money into Gaza hoping to buy quiet and essentially bribe the Hamas leadership to leave us alone, and that's why they pumped money in. But to call the brutal genocidal Hamas terror organization in Gaza the Israeli government's protege is a step too far, don't you think?
I don't mind stepping one step back and saying not protege, but certainly supported by the policy of the Israeli government of those times.
The alternative being waging an all-out war to try to topple it, but now we see what the cost would be.
Well, the alternative being putting more trust and continuing the Oslo process with the Fatah and with the Palestinian Authority, which is something, and we're going deep into Israeli politics here, and maybe we will kind of brush against this and then move forward because we have some interesting common issues to discuss. But what I'm saying is that after the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, which was perhaps one of the single most life-changing, history-changing, game-changing political assassinations in the whole of modern history. I can think of one or two more, not more than that. The game was changed and the Oslo Accord and mutual trust collapsed. You can blame both sides. I tend to blame the Palestinians a little more than the Israelis, but this agreement collapsed. It's still on the ground. We have the Palestinian Authority, but there was no effort to resume from where we left off towards a two-state solution, because the interests of the people who mostly held the helm at the Israeli government was to weaken the Palestinian Authority and to weaken the chance for a two-state solution in order for the settlers and the settlement ideology to reign free in the West Bank. So we have to understand Gaza, obviously, in this context. Both Hamas and the Israeli government and right wing, and I do not compare them on any level. They are not comparable. We are talking about monsters on the one side and my political enemies on the other side, two totally different things. But both of them shared the ideal of killing off the two-state solution, which is what the remaining Israeli left proudly stands for.
And I want to understand your optimism about the two-state solution, because for me it looks like on October 7th, Hamas fulfilled what is still a part of the core Palestinian ethos of violent struggle from the river to the sea. I've always said, peace will come the day that there is a Palestinian leader who's brave enough to stand up, not only to his own people, but also to the college tentifada and say, no, 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 no. We don't want from the river to the sea. We want from the river to something else. The rest is Israel. We want to live next to it.
I totally agree with that. Yes.
But if you agree with that, and you think that the Palestinian movement as a whole is still committed to that vision of from the river to the sea, that they don't think that Israel has a right to exist, that overwhelming majority of Palestinians think that the barbaric violence we saw on October 7th is justified, then how does it make sense to you that Israel might withdraw from the river to 9 miles away from the sea when the Palestinians are telling us that they want to use that as a staging ground to take the rest of it?
We are not going to do it tomorrow morning, nor are we going to make any agreement with the current level of Palestinian radicalization. By the way, nor with the current level of Israeli radicalization, because we have to remember that the percentage of Israelis who wish to erase Gaza, to delete Gaza, is thankfully lower than the equivalent percentage among Palestinians with genocidal plans about Israel, but we still have quite a crowd. So both nations will need to be heavily de-radicalized before we even start something. What I'm asking now as a pragmatic Israeli lefty, with notions of justice, with notions of humanism, but also not tending to be a suicidal myself. What I'm asking is for a political process, a regional political process to open, perhaps the Biden-Saudi Arabia plan, perhaps the Arab League plan, perhaps something equivalent, perhaps the EU would step in. Some kind of a process offering a horizon for the two-state solution. It will have to be, on the Palestinian side, a demilitarized horizon to begin with, and perhaps in the first generation. It will have to be something like Germany or Japan after the Second World War. But there has to be a political horizon. Then we can start shifting the statistics in the favor of a more humanist attitude on both sides.
I want to try to understand how you imagine a two-state solution preserving Israel's security interests. I understand the argument about needing to separate from the Palestinians. But the lesson that many Israelis will have drawn from October 7th is either we're there on the ground and we're able to guarantee security for ourselves, or there's a vacuum. And that vacuum gets filled by terrorists. That vacuum gets filled by the Iranian forces of chaos that have surrounded us on 7 different fronts. What guarantee can you give us that what happened in Kfar Aza will not repeat itself in Kfar Saba, that what happened in Sderot will not happen in Modi'in? I'm trying to understand your confidence in the notion that Israel can withdraw from territory where the overwhelming majority of people think that October 7th style atrocities are legitimate? And even if you have a piece of paper that says that it is demilitarized, how can you guarantee that an October 7th will not happen from the West Bank on a much bigger scale?
First of all, I'm not confident. I might be confident in coming to the world and saying that I'm for peace and for dividing the territory into two states. On this, I am confident. I'm confident that the lives of children in Gaza are part of my own heritage and sentiment and empathy. Of course, the lives of Israelis, that goes without saying. I'm confident on my moral positions. About the feasibility of a Palestinian state, and again, not tomorrow morning, and not next year, and maybe not even next decade. I am confident that without hands-on involvement of the international community, including regional power, this will not happen. So I'm banking now on something we never quite had before, which is a global community looking at us, all eyes not only on Rafah, all eyes on Israel and Palestine, because they are shocked into recognition that without global support, this conflict is not going to resolve itself.
And yet, despite support for the two-state solution, you've been quite vocal against the decision by the governments of Ireland, Spain, and Norway to recognize a Palestinian state now, so soon after October 7th. Why is that?
Well, obviously, these governments have been saying in their own languages things that supported the suspicion that such recognition does not really tell Hamas apart from more peaceful forces, if any, in Palestine. And no, I'm not having a recognition of a Palestinian state ruled by Hamas, or indeed any kind of a political agreement with Hamas. Hamas may have to change its colors, maybe its surviving leaders will have to change the ideology, maybe they'll come by a different name, I don't know. My negotiations will have to be with Fatah, with the Palestinian Authority, and hopefully with the next generation pragmatic leadership of the Palestinian Authority.
But if you support a recognition, if you support the creation of a Palestinian state, why do you oppose the recognition of Palestinian statehood by the governments who are saying this is going to advance the peace process? Do you disagree with that assessment?
Of course, the recognition of a Palestinian state should be a culmination of a long and careful process, which should have begun eons ago, as this I'm saying, as part of the Israeli left. But it's best to begin it now. Call it the reviving of Oslo. It could be the reviving of Oslo, but with many new and important points inserted, including the right to life and security of all Israeli citizens, including an inner Israeli debate about dismantling all or some of the settlements in the West Bank. This is not going to be easy for us at all.
All of the settlements?
I said all or some. All or some of the settlements in the West Bank. I have seen maps, for example, the more recent Geneva negotiations between Jews and Palestinians in the early 2000s, in which many of the settlements, well, it's all relative, we've had the Dark Ages in between.
Well, yeah, certainly compared to the Peel Commission, it's more recent.
But certainly some settlements may be able to stay on location. Maybe if there is a lot of trust building, some Jews can stay as residents of the Palestinian state. I wish. This is almost utopian. But look at the 2 million Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel. This is not a utopia. This is doable.
No, certainly if the Palestinians are committed to a democratic state, as their leaders are saying, as world leaders are saying they should be able to accommodate a very small Jewish minority. But I mentioned this example of you speaking up on social media against the recognition by the governments of Ireland, Norway, and Spain of a Palestinian state. Because I'm detecting this very interesting dynamic. You're firmly part of the Israeli left. You have been firmly, openly, unashamedly, unabashedly critical of the Netanyahu government. And yet you've really been sticking your neck out on social media and standing up for Israel and for Israel's right to prosecute this war. Now, to me, it's obvious how you do that juggling act.
Yeah, it's called the Zionist left. It has a word.
To me, it's obvious how you do that. But for people, and I have my own story of how I was, I'd protested against this government before the war, and then duty called, and I put on a suit and I became a government spokesman. But for many people outside the country who don't understand Israel's internal dynamics, they don't understand how you can be a critic of the government and a defender of the state at the same time. So let's put this on record. How do you square that circle?
Well, if these puzzled people come from Western nations, I would tell them, think of the good old social democrats. Before the age of hyper-progressivism, before postmodernist analyses of the Western hegemony and colonialism, before the age of woke, there was a left wing which could be national and proudly national, which was about social justice and peace, not about identity politics and dividing the world into persecutor and persecutee, north and south. So that kind of left is as alien to me as it probably is to you and to many people on the right. That kind of left also hates the guts of moderate left-wingers like myself and makes and ridicules as much as it can Zionist, liberal left-wing in Israel because they're afraid of us. Because they know that we are offering an attitude which includes compromise, proud in what we are as Israelis, self-criticism when needed, also and especially against the Netanyahu government, and a vision for the future. Our great advantage, the Zionist left, the hopeful Zionist left, the people who believe in two-state solution without being starry-eyed peaceniks willing to hug the Hamas. We are not that kind of people. Our advantage is that we are standing on the shoulders of giants. Most of the mainstream founding fathers and mothers of Zionism, of the Zionist movement, were holding more or less our set of beliefs. Israel's wonderful Declaration of Independence. If your viewer haven't read it yet,
it's a true piece of poetry, really. I mean, the most sublime canonical Jewish text since the prophets.
It's a wonderful Declaration of Independence, also in global, in world history terms. I recommend it as required reading. This is what we are standing on. So I really would like not to be confused with the starry-eyed lefties who wish to hug trees and to hug Arabs, or Palestinians, or freedom fighters, resistance massacres on the other side. This is not me. I am deeply in touch with the Jewish sense, historical sense. I'm a historian by profession, of loneliness, alonedness, and of insecurity, and of mortal danger. This is something that we have inherited. Security comes almost first to me. Remaining a human being is, by a small margin, even more important.
So that's the Zionist left, but we do have an anti-Zionist left in Israel and definitely around the Jewish world. Certain organizations, human rights organizations, B'Tselem, that will call Israel an apartheid state, be quoted by all of Israel's biggest critics as saying, look, even Israel's biggest human rights organizations are saying that Israel has no right to exist. And we've seen this around the world as well, with Jewish students taking part in these protests with open supporters of Hamas chanting from the river to the sea. What do you think is driving that? Why are they not part of the Zionist left? Why have they fallen off this cliff edge where they're essentially throwing Israel, the Jewish people, the Zionist left as well, to the wolves?
Yes, well, that process began quite long ago, about 2 or 3 decades, among academics, the so-called post-Zionists, who were not really post-Zionists, but anti-Zionists, in the sense that they went back into history to show that Israel shouldn't have become a state at all, that the legal, as we know, the legal constitutional entitlement of the Jews to their own country, despite its being approved by the highest international authorities, the UN and others, is suddenly out of its depth because of the Palestinian calamity, and I acknowledge the Palestinian calamity. But all the more so do I acknowledge the Jewish calamity and the legality, the admirable legality in which the Zionist leaders, above all Herzl in the first generation, Ben-Gurion and Weizmann in the second, made sure that the international community will legalize our wish for our liberal democratic nation state.
But the anti-Zionist left and the Jews protesting against Israel on campus, what don't they get? What do you see that they don't see? You know what, let me ask a different question. If you were to go to the college Tentifada on Columbia or any of the other college campuses and sit down with the Jews who are protesting against Israel and in favor of Hamas, what would you tell them?
Well, what I would have told the Bundists back in the 19th century, those who were anti-Zionist because they wanted to speak Yiddish and to remain Jewish citizens of the world. And I would tell them, my dears, you also come from a long tradition of Jewish descent, and I respect you, but now that we are facing a calamity or a disaster, and what I take to be an existential danger for the state of Israel, thank goodness it's not you who have to defend me. So yes, I respect the Jewish spectrum. You know, I wrote a book called Jews and Words in which my late father and I are talking about the whole vocal cacophony of the Jewish argument and debate. But when push comes to shove about the survival of the state of Israel, of course I want it to be a different kind of society.
But they don't think there should be a state of Israel at all. So what do you tell what do you tell them, those who are saying it is time for Jews to be powerless again, Israel should not exist, the Jews who live here between the river and the sea should be at the mercy of some greater Palestinian state? What do you tell them?
As I said before, and I'll be quite blunt about it because this is a blunt situation, I would say you are very welcome to live your life in expectation of the next Holocaust. I will not.
You've come under a lot of criticism from the anti-Zionist left, not necessarily within the Jewish world, but outside as well, as part of your outspokenness. I want to show here a tweet that we have from Owen Jones, a British journalist. Do we call him a journalist or a shock jock? He writes, responding to an interview of yours with Christiane Amanpour, this interview is even more nauseating than those given by Israeli officials and public figures who show open contempt for Palestinian life. This offers a compassionate gloss for and whitewashing of one of the worst crimes of the 21st century. He launches an absolute Twitter pylon with you. I have to tell you, I quite like Owen, actually, because every time he launches a Twitter pylon on me, it drives up my engagements, and Elon Musk sends me another $100, which is fantastic. But anyway, let's have a watch this interview you had with Christiane Amanpour that made this British far-left shock jock so angry.
I think that in this war, we have partially failed in doing that, although we have been trying. The IDF has attempted to diminish the danger to civilians, not always successfully, and sometimes preferring the safety of our own soldiers to the safety of local civilians. It is a complicated case. It is a set of horrible moral dilemmas.
You're making a case here that says, look, you're not a big fan of the government, but ultimately, Israel here is trying to fight a just war against a barbaric enemy, doing whatever it can. Maybe it could do better, but making great efforts to try to keep civilians safe. He sees that as whitewashing. He also launched one of his own shows attacking you. Let's have a quick watch of what he had to say.
If you like.
We're moralising from our armchair. Well, good professor, you're not exactly carrying in the rubble of Gaza, are you? When you say you're in a battered nation right now, well, from the video I can see the skyline of Tel Aviv behind you. As far as I can tell, all its buildings are still standing. So if you're a battered nation right now, where does it leave the ruins of Gaza?
Yeah, moralizing from an armchair, recording it literally with the couch behind him as he moralizes about Israel. Level of self-awareness from Owen Jones, 0. A lot of people came to your defense. I tried to defend you as well. And I'm wondering, how do you respond on a personal level and an emotional level as well when you find yourself the subject of an online firestorm? You are trying to be the voice of Israeli humanism and reasonableness and sanity. And people who claim to be on the left are coming after you as if you're some kind of genocidal monster.
No, absolutely. I get these trolls every day. You know, the short answer is that I'm a kibbutznik. And if you survive growing up in a kibbutz children's house and working in the kitchen and the laundry, believe me, you know how to handle conflicts, also by turning your back on them. So I saw what Owen Jones did, and then I muted the conversation and went on with my life happily and let people fight one another. Look, I have little to say to the illiberal left. The illiberal left has lost me. This is not a conversation that we can conduct. Also, I come from a very pragmatic line of builders, of people who want to walk out of a calamity and say, okay, where do we start rebuilding? How do we build Gaza, for the human beings there? How do we build a trust and conversation within Israeli society? How do we rebuild a peace process, or at least a territorial agreement? Come on, let's pull our sleeves up. People like Owen are mega trolls. They live in cyberspace. They don't have an existence outside of it. So I will not have a debate, a conversation with anyone who does not have a reasonable future orientation. And these people don't. They are in the business of destroying the Jews, destroying Israel, destroying individuals' reputation. I think they're doing harm, but my point is not to argue against their ignorance or their idiocy or their destructiveness. I keep going, and this is again a difference between the moderate left, of which they're afraid, and the vocal extremist left, as we have seen. And the reason why that particular gentleman and quite a few others went into so much trouble to actually shoot a video against my interview with Amanpour.
It's flattering, isn't it?
Only goes to show, no. My personal ego is well tended elsewhere. It only goes to show that they are afraid of the moderate left. They are afraid of the Israeli Zionist left. They are afraid of the moderates in other countries. They are afraid of the two-state solution if it ever opens up for discussion. This is their fear, because they do not want peace between Israel and Palestine. They do not want a two-state or even a one-state solution in which peace will reign. They want to see death and destruction, not in Gaza, but in Israel itself. They want to annihilate Israel, and some of them would happily extend it to all living Jews. I don't have a debate with them. I have a war with them, but I will fight it by concentrating on the Israeli-Palestinian positive future.
I wish I could say that people who take Owen Jones' perspective are all trolls hiding under some sort of cyber bridge, but they exist out there in the real world, and this is now increasingly becoming the norm within academic circles, this progressive wokeism. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective as an academic, how did this happen? That so many seemingly intelligent people, with all these letters before and after their names, fell into this trap of somehow shilling for Hamas. How did they become hoodwinked by Hamas and this ideology that leads them, as you say, to support the violent destruction of the Jewish state?
There you go. You know, we've had these waves before. There were intellectuals in Britain in the 1930s who fell in love with the Nazis and what they stood for intellectually. There were people in the West, in France and elsewhere, in the 1950s, who were sworn Stalinists. It took them a long time to wake up from the Stalinist dream. There were people in the 1970s and 80s in love with the most violent revolutionaries and leaders in Latin America. Why? Because it was sexy, because it was Che Guevara. There will always be, I don't like the term useful idiots. These people are not idiots. But they do have a certain frame of mind which embraces generalization and happily lives within it. And we have our job, people like myself, both academically, by the way, and as a public voice, we need to complicate, we need to nuance, we need to show people the different parts of the coin. We need to make ordinary Israelis as human and close to people's heart as ordinary Gazans are. We need to talk to the brain and the heart of those people who are not totally fossilized. But yes, many of this generation within the academic extreme left are fossilized.
I mean, there is a fear now that this is not only people protesting on campus and not only raising the next generation of journalists and members of Congress, if that were not scary enough, but genuinely pushing Israelis and Jews out of public spaces and hounding them. Yes. And we've seen academics calling for boycotts of Israeli academia. I'm wondering, as an academic, has that affected you personally?
My own circle, it all depends where you are, what part of academia you inhabit. I was very lucky as a historian because my main research is on the era of Enlightenment. I research
Right, this isn't post-colonial gender
liberalism,
studies.
So my
right.
friends, my colleagues are the good old-fashioned liberals or social democrats or enlightened of the old age, those that the new left loves to hate. But the more you are in the humanities, the more you suffer, and I've already been exposed to dozens of stories. Whereas my friends, the chemists and physicists, are doing well and traveling the world, and nobody is telling them anything.
What are you hearing in the humanities spaces?
What I find most infuriating is that people who were invited to a sabbatical and pack a sabbatical abroad, in a university abroad, and packed their things and families and flew over there, only to be told literally at the airport that they are not wanted anymore. There is something about human decency here, or the accusing of individuals, which is outrageous, and students. So I hear that University College London or King's College London is going to punish by withdrawing all sorts of privileges from Israeli students, just for being Israeli. This is identity politics as at its worst, and it's also
Sorry, are you
racist.
telling me that Jewish Israeli academics are having their sabbaticals withdrawn in an act of protest against this war?
Absolutely, it's happening already. I've been exposed myself to 3 or 4 cases, including the dramatic one of the person who flew over with her family, only to be told that her sabbatical, her job has been withdrawn.
Has she spoken publicly about this?
No.
Will she?
I don't know. I'm talking about fresh cases that have come to my knowledge within my academic circles, and there are dozens more.
And I'm sorry, how are these universities justifying withdrawing a sabbatical from a Jewish Israeli academic? This is for Gaza? This is for Rafah?
No, they set up those motions about severing all ties with Israel. And severing all ties with Israel means that you can spit in the face of work contracts with Israelis that you have already signed.
Absolutely horrific.
No, I agree.
Do you see a pushback against this within academic spaces?
Well, I used to sit on the National Inter-University Commission for dealing with the boycott aspects of the BDS against universities. We've had 1 or 2 cases a month, it was, and we dealt with them usually quietly and calmly and using legal language if we had to, and it worked. Right now we are talking about a tsunami. It will be a matter of years before this tsunami withdraws. But having said that, just again, to nuance the situation, Eylon, you would be happy to know that my good friends and family members who are in the sciences, in the natural and exact sciences, don't look worried at all. They're traveling the universe and talking to their colleagues. So this is a malaise of the humanities and the social sciences rather than the natural sciences. And this speaks a lot for the chances of old-fashioned rationalism to come back. Here I speak as an Enlightenment person. It's not about rationalism, what's happening now. It's about tremendous feelings, tremendous anger, sometimes rightly so when you see the pictures from Gaza, uninformed, uncontextualized, unsupported by historical facts. But there it is. I also have a gush of feelings when I look at Gaza, and I also wonder, and have wondered publicly, what level of war crimes have been committed by my own army. Every army, by the way, commits war crimes in every war, but what level? I don't know yet. This will have to be investigated. But having said that, Israel's right to exist and to defend itself is beyond question for this particular Zionist left-winger.
And for you, that commitment to humanism and rationalism and to the state of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, I think it's fair to say a large part intellectual legacy of your father, the late author Amos Oz, correct?
It's part of his legacy, perhaps.
Part of his legacy. One of his timeless quotes that I was thinking of it actually just now when I was in Krakow for the March of the Living, and I saw someone had spray painted Free Palestine on the side of one of the synagogues in Krakow. It's an amazing quote. When my father was a young man in Vilna, every wall in Europe said, "Jews go home to Palestine." 50 years later, when he went back to Europe on a visit, the walls all screamed, "Jews, get out of Palestine." How did this shift take place? What did Herzl get wrong? Herzl thought that if the Jews are hated because they are a stateless people who do not have a mother country. Once the Jews have a mother country in their ancient homeland, then even the Jews around the world will be respected because they are intimately associated with the mother country. He was correct in that regard that Jews around the world are now associated with Israel. Wrong that it would take away the sting, wrong that it would take away the hostility. But what did he get wrong in thinking that this would take the sting out of anti-Semitism if we are now in a situation where, you know, people whose grandparents were saying Jews go to Palestine are now chanting Jews get out of Palestine?
Good question, Eylon, and Herzl got it wrong by thinking that the future state of the Jews, mind you, he didn't call it Jewish state, he called it the state of the Jews and all its citizens, other citizens. The state of the Jews will become a normal member in the family of nations, or the community or the republic globally of nations. Instead, we have become the Jew of the global family. Israel has become in itself an embodiment of the eternal Jew. How did that come about? Partially by the tremendous stroke of luck, and then its opposite of the Six-Day War, taking over the occupied territories of the West Bank and Gaza and the Golan Heights, which is a different story. Then all sides concerned mishandling the conflict and the occupation for a very long time, not coming up with solutions. And even if we had come up with solutions, it may have failed.
You think if the 1967 war hadn't happened, Israel hadn't taken over the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, Gaza Strip, Golan Heights, then we wouldn't see a movement now of people still consistently challenging the right of a state of the Jews to exist in any borders whatsoever?
Love would have been in history, and I do would have been.
Well, you're a history professor, so that's why I'm asking you hypotheticals. Because I know those are questions you never answer.
In 1967, Gaza belonged to Egypt.
Yes.
The West Bank belonged to Jordan. Israel is now in peace with both Egypt and Jordan, who didn't want Gaza and the West Bank back, incidentally. Maybe that would have worked in a better direction. I don't know. But I was going to say my bottom line, Eylon, is that I'm not sure that even a peaceful state of Israel, with the kibbutzim and the optimism and the culture and the literature and the music, and you have it, and living fairly uneventfully with its non-democratic neighbors, even such an Israel, and this I say to Herzl, may not have alleviated anti-Semitism. It is too old and too deep. But having said that, I don't blame everything that's happening now on anti-Semitism. And I think, and this is the most Zionist thing I will be saying today, is that our destiny must again be in our own hands. We need to work our way out of this abyss, we Israelis, also by recruiting the help of all our international friends, because that's what Herzl himself did.
And that, I think,
need international friends.
Is, to summarize, the ultimate difference between the Zionist left and the anti-Zionist left. The Zionist left still believing that the Jewish people have to take their fate in their own hands, that power is important. It's not a dirty word. The question is how you exercise it, and if you do that with humanity and in accordance with your values. And the anti-Zionist left says, no, Jews should be powerless, at least not within the context of a sovereign state of their own, and place their faith in greater societies and institutions to keep them safe.
Yes, but remember, there's also an anti-Zionist right, not the ultra-Orthodox one, not Zionist at all, but it's the extreme right. It's Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and the Messianics who are also being anti-Zionists, but saying this is all God above. The 7th of October was an act of God in order for us to enter Gaza and to resettle it or whatever. And who cares what Biden and the world is saying, because God is on our side. And these extremist statements are no less anti-Zionists than the left-wing anti-Zionists.
And that's a big hot potato that I think is a topic for a different conversation. I want to end actually on another note of optimism, like we started, and play a game with you. And we're calling this game, we have here on the screen behind us, Fania Oz-Salzberger and the Order of the Teaspoon. Your father, the late Amos Oz, said this quote, which led to the Order of the Teaspoon against fanaticism. He said, and I'm going to quote this in full because I think this quote from How to Cure a Fanatic is so important, and then we're going to play Fania Oz and the Order of the Teaspoon.
Wow.
He said, I believe that if one person is watching a huge calamity, let's say a conflagration, a fire, there are always three principal options. One, run away. As far away and as fast as you can, and let those who cannot run burn. Two, Write a very angry letter to the editor of your paper demanding that the responsible people be removed from office with disgrace, or for that matter, launch a demonstration. Or 3, bring a bucket of water and throw it on the fire. And if you don't have a bucket, bring a glass. And if you don't have a glass, use a teaspoon. Everyone has a teaspoon. And yes, I know a teaspoon is little and the fire is huge, but there are millions of us, and each one of us has a teaspoon. Now, I would like to establish the order of the teaspoon. People who share my attitude, not the runaway attitude or the letter attitude, but the teaspoon attitude, I would like them to walk around wearing a little teaspoon on the lapel of their jackets, like I have the hostage ribbon here on the lapel of mine,
Yes.
so that we know that we are in the same movement, in the same brotherhood, and I'll add sisterhood, in the same order, the order of the teaspoon, the Harry Potter novel that J.K. Rowling never wrote. So I want to give you 3 teaspoons and ask you where you would throw these 3 teaspoons to put out the fires of today.
Beautifully done. My goodness, I'm impressed with the production here. Bravo. My 3 teaspoons, and every tweet is a teaspoon. I don't have to tell you that. And every public speaking is a teaspoon, and every hugging of a Palestinian friend is a teaspoon. This teaspoon is thrown at the fire burning within Israeli society. We have to put it out. I cannot put out the alien fire of the Messianics. You can see it in their eyes, but I can put out a lot of unnecessary hostility between Israelis and Israelis. That's my 1 teaspoon. My 2nd teaspoon is to the Israeli Arab citizens. Some of them call themselves Palestinian Israelis. To hug them, to tell them that we are fellow citizens and this is not an apartheid state, will not be one as long as I'm alive here. And my 3rd teaspoon is to the global community, including the anti-Israeli hatred that we have been discussing all over. Wake up, inform yourselves, rethink, nuance your thinking, and let's talk about history and especially about the future. Well spent teaspoons, hopefully.
Fania Oz-Salzberger, 3 teaspoons to help us put out some massive fires. I'll bring a bucket for the next guest as well. Thank you very much for having this, joining this enlightening conversation on State of a Nation. Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of State of a Nation with Fania Oz-Salzberger. As always, if you are enjoying this, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts. Follow us on all social media platforms. Tell your friends to listen as well if you enjoyed that conversation. I'm Eylon Levy, and we'll be back soon with more episodes beyond the headlines and between the lines. Thanks for joining us.